Hi, I'm Jarrett Fuller. Welcome to Scratching the Surface. So in my back pocket, I always keep this small notebook where I write to-do lists, quotes I come across, reminders to myself, ideas for things that I'm writing about at the time, things like that. Tucked inside that notebook is a small pen that's really interesting. It's almost flat. It's no thicker than the inkwell and no more than 4 inches long. It's made of titanium. It feels like it will last forever. It has a little clip on the side that I can tuck into the pages of my notebook. It's not only my favorite pen that is with me all the time, it's also one of my favorite products in general. This pen is called Pen Type C, and it's one of the many products that I own that were designed by Levy and Che-Wei Wang. Taylor and Che-Wei are designers and the founders of the art and design studio CW&T. Founded in 2009, CW&T moves between small-scale objects like my pen, but also clocks and keychains and tape dispensers, and large-scale installations, interactive software, and other tools. I'm a fan of these products, but I'm also a fan of how they think about their work. Guided by a set of principles that they have on their website, principles like stay small, share everything, never exit, Taylor and Che-Wei have created a design practice that feels unlike any other. Their products are accessible and thoughtful, but also critical and unusual and personal. Each comes with a story and was designed to last multiple generations. To simply call them industrial designers almost feels like an understatement to me. I've been curious to talk with them for a while. So when they launched their recent Kickstarter over the summer for a product called MR Tape Dispenser, a Kickstarter project for a multi-radius wall-mounted tape dispenser, it seemed like a good time to have them on the show and talk about their work in general. We begin this conversation in a way no other episode ever has, by talking about tape dispensers. But this quickly expands to a conversation about process, about experimentation, about the challenges with finishing projects, and the unseen labor in staying small and independent. Che-Wei has a background in architecture and Taylor in film and computer science. They met at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program, which is this really interesting experimental graduate program. And this range of education influences all of their work. And I can't tell you how inspiring I found this conversation. Scratching the Surface is supported by listeners like you. If you like what we do here, please consider supporting us over on our new Substack. Our monthly newsletter is filled with design news, updates on previous guests, and book roundups. It's free for everyone, and we have paid tiers that feature bonus content, exclusive interviews, and more. Head over to our website to sign up and get Scratching the Surface in your inbox every month. Thank you for listening, and here is my conversation with Taylor Levy and Che-Wei Wang. I don't normally start these talking about a very specific product, but because you just finished this Kickstarter for your latest product, the MR tape dispenser, I thought maybe we just talk about that a little bit first, because I actually think there's some ideas embedded in that product that speak to your studio generally and your practice generally. And I want to start by hearing a little bit about the development process of that product. And specifically, I'm interested in where in the process do you decide this is for other people? This is something that we are going to put on Kickstarter. Can you talk a little bit about that development and then that turn into making it into something for others?
No, it's really funny that you're asking about MR tape dispenser, because that was probably the longest span of when we came up with an idea to when we actually decided to release a thing of anything that we've ever made. We came up with the idea for MR tape dispenser. I think it was right out of grad school in like 2009. And the idea centered around this very naive and whimsical thing that we were like, tape is beautiful. We want to have these long stripes of it on our wall and like mounted. And so the original, we actually made a bunch of these out of, yeah, bent sheet metal at the time.
Mm.
And the final one is still made out of bent sheet metal. But the idea was like, how can we create this very simple way of mounting our tape for the purpose of showing these like rectangular strips of color?
And when they were bigger, yeah, they were like pretty monstrous tape dispensers. So
Monstrous.
it was never intended to be a product. It's more just like we want these things in studio. We had a lot of tape on hand that we wanted to, yeah, we just wanted a way to like mount it nicely to the wall. So yeah, we just made like a few internally.
And they were like, they didn't work that well because like at the time it was like 1 foot of tape that was showing.
Yeah, they were
And
big.
Oh,
like you never want that much tape exposed. And
right.
the serration was done in a way
It's just
that
like a
wasn't
fly
good.
trap. It's just like catching
It
the
was
Yeah,
flies on the
exactly.
back.
essentially
Yeah.
a fly
Yeah.
trap. Like the whole thing was not a great idea, but we had these like massive things. They were big. And we've had them in our basement for a really long time. But sort of at the core of this was actually like a very interesting design, I think, and an interesting idea. And then Sei-Wei kind of got interested in it again. Um, I like never was that interested. I wasn't as interested in it as Sei-Wei.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
it's always been on the back of my mind. I
Mm.
love working with sheet metal. And I think over the last 10 years or so, prototyping in sheet metal has become easier and easier. You
Mm.
know, used to have like a pretty close relationship with a metal shop to like get them to make, small things, small runs for you. But now there's like all these, there's like Oshcut, there's Send Cut Send, and all these places where you can just like get instant quotes and get stuff made and shipped to you. And so, yeah, in the last 5 years or so, I've been using them a lot, but they still weren't, they wouldn't be able to make the tape dispenser because it has all these weird bends and
Right.
it is
Machined.
machined as well, and there's like the serration. So it wasn't quite there yet, but it was because I've been designing a lot of stuff in sheet metal. It's always been like on the back of my mind. And so every once in a while, I would like talk to someone about it, and they'd be like, "Oh, I know someone that could do it." And so, yeah, I would say in the past 5 years, there are multiple attempts at working with smaller sheet metal places that were suggested to be places that could make it. And I realized, I didn't realize like it would be this hard to make a bent piece of sheet metal, but it's weirdly hard. And yeah, it wasn't until we started working with our current manufacturer, who we work with really closely across many, many projects, and they are quite good. And so we're like, ooh, maybe they can do it because everything else they've done is like really top notch.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we just kind of threw it at them and be like, hey, can you do it? And they were just, yeah, no problem. They kind of nailed it on the first run.
So I did not realize that this was so long in the back of your minds this whole time, because that actually speaks to what I wanted to talk about with that product specifically, but with your practice generally. And by my count, tell me if this is wrong, but that was your 15th Kickstarter project, I think.
Mm. Sounds
That
right.
sounds right.
Yeah.
Okay, since 2011, the first one was Pen Type A.
Yeah.
And I read an interview with you both, and you had this line where you said, "We don't think too hard about how products might resonate with an audience." And what you meant by that, or at least what I took you to mean by that, that sounds harsh at first, but
Yeah.
I took it to mean it's like you don't do user testing. You're not like out there, focus grouping. You're like, what works for you? Like, what's the thing you want to do? What's the thing you need? And so many
Mhm.
of those Kickstarter projects to me feel like things that came out of real needs that you both had in your studio and in your life. And I have like two parts to this question. And the first part is I'm curious, where does the shift happen between personal need and we want to offer this to everyone else? And so in
Mm.
the tape dispenser, it sounds like there was, at least for Che-Wei, there was always a little bit of this could be a thing, and it was a manufacturing
Hmm.
thing. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk about that, um,
Yeah.
that jump from this solves our need to now we're offering this for sale for others. How does that change the product, or how do you think through that part of the process?
Yeah, I'm not, yeah, I think it depends on the project. Sometimes it just seems natural. Like sometimes we're working on a sketch, and almost always it's not intended for a wider audience. Almost
Yeah.
always we're just making stuff for ourselves, for our home, just like fixing stuff or like, I don't know, just making stuff that I want. And yeah, I think it depends. Sometimes it just like naturally progresses into becoming something that's seems like other people might appreciate. It's kind of, for me in my head at least, it's like a pretty gray line where it's
Mm,
just like, I don't know, the design just like reaches a point where we're like, oh, this feels finished, or it feels like other people could also or might want this in their homes or might want to interact with it. And usually, not usually, yeah, sometimes we'll make like a small run, like,
uh,
like we could machine a few, or if it's a 3D printed thing, we'll 3D print a bunch, just like give them out to people, or just like carry it around for a couple of years, sometimes just like showing it around and
yeah.
using it. And then, yeah, sometimes people will be like, oh, that's cool. I want that. And I think for me, at least, that's a little bit of an encouragement to be like, oh, maybe we should work on it and refine it a little bit more until it's at a point where we could manufacture it and give it to more people. For the tape dispenser, I think it was, yeah, just like, yeah, we did give some to a few friends. I don't think they used those monster ones, but they're like,
We
oh,
got
that's
one
kind of
given back
cool.
to us.
Yeah, they actually returned
Yeah.
it to us.
She was like,
Right.
I don't need this thing
Yeah.
That's a kind of user testing. That's some
Yeah,
data you could
yes.
use.
It's like casual user testing, I guess, just like feeling it out. Yeah, and I think, yeah, I don't know. I think for the tape dispenser, I kind of got like a second wind on it, essentially.
Hmm.
Like years later, we brought it out of storage, looked at it, and then, yeah, worked on like refining
Yeah.
it to be something more reasonable to have in a home.
Yeah. For that one though, not to talk the whole time about the tape dispenser, it was actually kind of hard to agree that that was a good thing to launch. Like I
Ah,
had a lot of problems with the product from a framing and like storytelling perspective once it was getting to the end of design because, there was a while that we were like, tape dispensers have to be heavy enough to sit on your like to be able to rip tape from them, and they have to be stable enough to rip
yeah.
tape with one hand. Our tape dispenser isn't that. And so there was a while we were actually like trying to make bases for it,
Mm,
and like they weren't good and nothing was working well. And so the project just didn't come to this like nice closure moment. And then at a certain point, we were like, you know what? This is a mountable tape dispenser. It
mm-hmm.
probably just doesn't fit into that category. And as long as we're very clear to people that it's not that type of tape dispenser, then, then it can become a thing. And,
Yeah.
we're offering that. We're not offering this other thing. And once we were just like, oh, we can just agree on that, then it was allowed to be released into the world. But before that, we were having like some issues getting it to move forward.
I don't know how to ask this question, but I was thinking about this a lot when I was thinking about the products of yours that I own and love, and the way you as a studio communicate. And I was interested in this. I like I said, I don't know how to ask this question. Balance or tension between experimentation and exploration and launching and functionality and usefulness. And the way you structured your studio is so you can experiment, so you can try things, so you can prototype very quickly. And in some ways, I almost feel like that's the easy part. Coming up with these
Mhm.
ideas, making things, testing them out,
Yeah.
that's easy. But then to kind of finish that, to take it all the way to market, that's actually the hard part, to keep iterating on that. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you, and so what is interesting about what you just said is that even the tape dispenser, and I promise we won't talk about the tape dispenser the whole time, even that was a type of experimentation all the way up to launch about how to actually make this useful. How do you maintain that interest in a, like how do you keep that experimentation throughout the whole process? And then also, how do you find that balance in your day to day between experimenting and ideas and then also iterating to take a product to market?
I definitely feel it. Like we talk about it a lot. Like, yeah, prototyping, coming up with ideas. That's actually, yeah, quite easy. It comes easy. It's really fun. You get a lot out of it. And then, yeah, that last 5% of
Right.
getting it to manufacture is pretty grueling. It's expensive. There's a lot of stress involved, launching stuff, marketing, like all that stuff is not in our wheelhouse generally. It's not where we like spending our time.
Yeah.
And yeah, kind of going back to your earlier question, I think oftentimes the the hurdle that we have to cross from going from like a prototype to a manufactured product is often us gauging whether it's worth it or not. We're like, is it
Mm.
worth going through all this trouble to get this product to manufacture? Or maybe it's not. Like, we don't want to put in that energy for this thing. So it's more just like, do we believe in this thing, or do we think it's worth it? And so I think, yeah, we're constantly balancing that. And from my perspective, because it's this big hurdle that we have to get over, oftentimes I'm just trying to plow through. Like I try to use the momentum that I have from prototyping, because that goes really fast and I'm energized and I want to push forward. And while I'm prototyping, it still feels great. And I try to use that momentum to like carry it into manufacturing. But sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes we're
Yeah.
like, oh, we should just pause on this and wait a couple years before we get back into it.
How easy is it for you to give up on something? Or is it one of those things where you're never actually giving up and all of that stuff is there in the background? I mean, I guess, again, sorry to keep bringing up the tape dispenser, but I have two of them
Yeah.
sitting
Yeah,
over there. I'm looking at
Yeah.
them
we
right
never
now.
give up.
I think like it's like our answer is like we never give up and we give up all the time.
No, we talked about this.
Like
It's like
multiple times
giving
a day.
up versus quitting. We never give up. But I mean, this is like what I like to tell other people. It's like, I think what we are trying to do is never giving up,
Yeah.
but knowing when to quit. Because I think those are
Uh,
two different things. It's like,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, giving up is kind of being like, I can't take it anymore. Like or I don't know where to go with this thing. Versus quitting is like, I acknowledge that this doesn't have a future and I'm
Right.
gonna let it go. And so I don't know if we probably have quit things, but
Yeah.
yeah, there is a lot of not giving up.
Yeah, but I
Oh,
want
go
to
ahead.
add something to that too, because like there's certain thresholds of where you give up or where you're like,
Right.
I know I'm gonna just hit pause right now. And I think I consider my threshold actually, for some things pretty low.
Uh,
Like when there's a lot of friction with something and it just doesn't feel right, there's so many other things going on that I'll just like pick up another project and I'll let that thing slide to the back burner until there's a time where something else comes up that like injects this energy that I need to make it move forward. And like I'm very much okay. I think us as a studio, we're okay with like shelving things for
yeah.
certain periods of time when we hit a block.
And maybe it's helpful here actually to sort of frame the studio more broadly, because from what I can tell, these products, and I want to come back to talking about the products specifically in a bit, but these products are not the only thing that you're doing. You describe CW&T as an art and design studio. You're making projects that are larger scale, installations, sort of software experiments, all of these types of things that are not, the end goal is not to be a Kickstarter project.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still working with clients? Are you still doing client work also?
Yeah, a
You're
small
nodding
slice
your
of
heads
our.
different ways, right?
Yeah, we
Love to see
have
that.
Yeah, we
a
have.
couple clients, and I think we're fortunate that that's not what drives the studio. So we
Yeah.
are very selective with who we work with, and it's essentially like, yeah, unless the project is like very interesting or fun, or the people we get to work with are interesting or fun, yeah, we don't take on client projects, and we certainly don't like pursue it. Like we're not out there trying to get client projects.
Can you talk about the overlap or the intersection of those different facets of the studio? And if I missed any, fill those in. But you have the what I'll call the shop, the products that you're selling directly to
Hmm.
customers. You have these larger art experimental thing.
Hmm.
I'll let you
Yeah.
use your language for that. And you have this small section of client work. How do those start to talk to each other? How do those influence each other? How do you see those all fitting together into a coherent practice?
Yeah, it's happening more and more, I'd say. When we initially started, it was the opposite. We were totally client based.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there wasn't really that much overlap. But I think now that we take clients on pretty selectively, I think, at least for the last one, we were like, I mean, yeah, we were like, we're gonna build a clock. That's kind of it. And I think that's our, I think we're at this point now where we can say things like that. So if a client comes over and is like, hey, we want to do a project with you, and if it's
Mhm.
like wide open, which sometimes is the case, from our end, we're like, oh, cool. Let's make a clock. And it could be
Right.
like an installation scale clock, or it could be, it may end up actually have nothing to do with timekeeping, but we like using that as a starting point just to like frame the work and like drive the
Yeah.
conversation. And it seems like there's always something interesting to say or do around timekeeping. So that's like maybe like the biggest overlap between our kind of art-ish work and client work in a kind of our ideal scenario when working with clients. Um, and then yeah, there are other clients where it's more just like, I don't know if it's like traditional industrial design, but yeah, it's more like, yeah, working on industrial design work,
Yeah.
a mix of design and engineering and manufacturing, kind of using all the knowledge that we've built up, you know, bringing products in manufacture and applying that to work that we do with clients.
Hearing you say that, I'm thinking about my previous question about like giving up and quitting. And I'm wondering if that's related to this in some way, that products, how you think about the endpoint of a product. Do things start, or a project generally, do things start more amorphous and then they can fall into these buckets like, oh, this actually seems like there's a product here, or this could evolve into some bigger experimental thing, or let's, some idea from 10 years ago manifests itself in a current client work. Is that a way to never give up, that actually these buckets are all flowing into one
Mm.
big bucket? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I'm also just thinking about how to weave our creative practices into this, like our own personal creative practices, and how those are woven into the fabric of our studio. And, I'm not going to speak for Che-Wei on that behalf. Like he's constantly making things. Yeah, he has his own creative outputs that are different than mine.
Mm,
But you know, there's a lot of things that I do privately. Like I'm really interested in reading and writing and learning about writing and the structure of story.
mm,
I'm really interested in like a few years ago I got really into painting, and just like I'm very interested in the creative process and sort of practicing what creative output looks like,
mhm.
and practicing how you get to those points. And I think that, you know, if I'm not necessarily designing like a pen, let's say, you know, practicing for when the next time comes that I actually make a product, that happens in lots of different ways that are not product design in my life, where that's like learning how to play the piano, or like learning how to, like, studying how structure or how stories are structured. It percolates in like so many different ways. And I really see it as the same thing and it's the same practice. But,
Yeah.
often that's not really at the surface of what people see from our studio.
Yeah, I mean it's very similar. Yeah, it's like it does flow quite freely. I'd say like when I am sketching and prototyping, which is I think yeah different from Taylor. Like I think Taylor has these like side art practices, like she plays piano a lot these days, or like she does painting, print making, yeah, reading and writing. Like, she's kind of has a broad creative practice. I say my creative practice is quite narrow. I'm like, for work, I'm sketching, designing products and prototyping. And on my free time, that's also what I enjoy doing. And so, yeah, for me, it's like very mushed together. And,
Mm.
so it'll be like the weekend. I'm like, oh, I want to make this thing. It's weird, but I'm just going to try making it. And I have no idea whether that thing is going to eventually become a product or if it's just a one-off or it might become a thing that ends up in a art installation in the future. And I think, yeah, from my perspective, it kind of doesn't matter. Ultimately, I'm just like, I want this thing to exist. So I'm just going to make it and it will go on a path that I can't really control. It'll just evolve however it wants to evolve.
Yeah.
And yeah, it'll just be what it is.
You started the studio in 2009. Your first Kickstarter project was 2011. From what I understand, when the studio started, it was a lot more I mean, you said already it was a lot more client-based work, but it also seems like it was a lot more software-based work.
Yeah.
If I can get you to reflect a little bit, and I realize 2009 is 15 years ago, what was the ambition for starting the studio? What kind of work did you want to do? And how has that evolved and gone where it's wanted to go over the last 15 years?
Yeah. I don't know if we had any ambitions when we were starting. I think our main priority was feeding ourselves
Right.
and not working, 9 to 5 jobs essentially. Like we
Mm.
were pretty adamant about like being independent, being able to feed ourselves.
Having control over our
Yeah,
time.
having control over time, which is still a big thing, that we discuss. And just software at the time happened to be the thing that paid the bills. And we
Mm.
happened to have the appropriate set of skills to cater to clients that needed that kind of work. And I think a lot of that, the type of work we were doing, even on our free time at that time, was heavily influenced by where we met at our grad school. We went to
Mm.
ITP at NYU. And, there's like a certain kind of approach to using technology in that program that we still believe in and kind of, yeah, think about a lot. And so that was sort of, I think, where the studio was going. It's like for client projects, we got to do these like weird software projects that were interactive. And then on the side, we were also thinking about that kind of thing, but then also thinking about hardware and like just like
Mm.
making stuff that we wanted for ourselves. Um, yeah, so yeah, I think it's just like slowly evolved to be more in tune with what we just want in our lives. As we get older, as we live in different scenarios, we just like our needs and wants have evolved or changed. And
Yeah.
so now we kind of, yeah, we think about different things and we make different things.
I I want to hear you talk a little bit more about both of your individual backgrounds and how that influences the work you do now. Say, well, you studied architecture, and
Hmm.
then Taylor, you studied film and computer science, and I'm wondering how that, and then you met at ITP, like you said. How do those individual disciplines influence the way you think about the work now? The sort of the film, computer science stuff, and the architecture side, how do those all converge into this, I'm using this term broadly, industrial design practice that you've created for yourself?
So going back to when I was studying film and computer science, you know, it was at a time where, the disciplines of technology and art were sort of kept at a distance from each other. And I remember when I was studying film, I was both interested in it I got really interested in film theory, even though I was interested in making movies too, but I loved the classes where I could really look deeply into a movie and try to figure out and pick out like why this story is so good, or
Yeah.
why this director is able to do, like how they do these very, very small things that make an audience feel in a specific way. And, you know, I guess I could think about that time in my life. And I think about, I guess, my whole life as that, just like noticing that
Hmm.
and like pulling that out and being very curious about, like, wow, how do they do that? And today
Yeah.
still I'm like fascinated just by that process. And when that moment happens, and like thinking about how myself can produce and like surface those moments within my own work is something that interests me. And then the computer science thing was, at the time, my mom was like, you should like do something like practical, but I happened to really like it. And there's a certain point in when I was in school, it was getting quite hard, and I was like, I'm not going to be like a coder
Right.
later. But I remember my mom was like, you have to just like stick with this, like keep doing it. And I actually loved studying computer science when I was in undergrad too. There were these rocky moments, but um, it was, I wasn't learning programming languages. I was learning also about structure and about how people
Mm.
think and how their thoughts are um, like restructured in relationship to machines. And I still think about those things to this day. And, I think of software as like the most powerful and creative tool that there is, because it's so accessible and it's so fast, and you're not like using many resources when you're doing it except for your own.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I just, I like computer science too.
Yeah. I have so many questions I could ask you about that answer, but I do want to hear, say, in architecture, how that experience shapes this.
Yeah, I think studying architecture formed the way I approach just practicing design.
Mm.
I think it's probably pretty well known. Like, it's tough to go through architecture school. It's like very rigorous. It's very demanding. And I think I did pretty well in school. Early in school, I almost failed out twice because I was not so focused. But once I decided to be focused, there was a turning point. I did really well. Like I ended up
Mm.
graduating, yeah, I don't know, whatever those honor thingies are, and
You
I
got
won
that
a
really fancy
scholarship. Yeah.
award, yeah.
Yeah, I ended up getting like at the time the biggest architectural fellowship, whatever grant that you could possibly
Mm.
get as an undergraduate in this country. And I was like, whoa, this is kind of
Nice.
cool. I guess I am good. Is kind of the feeling I got. It was like yeah, I think as a student, as I was graduating, I was like, I think I'm pretty good at this. And then that fellowship thing really kind of like locked it in my head. I was like, oh, I actually did pretty well, I guess. And I was lucky, I'm sure. Like, there's lots of great architecture students. But yeah, I think that style of working through a design and like very rigorously questioning everything over and over really drilled that kind of practice into my head. Um, but it's quite frustrating. Like I think I approached architecture school, or I ended up in architecture school not knowing there was a industrial design discipline. So if I knew, I think I would have had a very different experience.
Yeah.
When I was much younger, I was dabbling in product design and sketching stuff. I just didn't know that you could do that for a living or that you could study it. So
Right.
architecture was the closest thing.
Right. Right.
Um, so yeah, I think it would have been different, but I'm glad I had that experience. I also practiced architecture for a little bit And I still think it's a pretty cool thing, but I enjoy applying that kind of thinking, or more just like that discipline, that level of discipline
Yeah.
at an industrial design scale.
If I were to define the core of your practice, there is this output that runs through everything, which is these sort of small, handheld, utilitarian, long-lasting, well-crafted physical objects. Seems to be this through line for the last
Mm.
15 years. And I'm wondering what it is about that form, something you can hold in your hand, something that's machined, that has this weight to it. And I don't mean weight as in heavy, but weight as in like this is going to be around a while. Think of like pen
Mm.
type B, for example, there. um what is it about this form that has captured your interest for the last 15 years? How does both of your answers about how this background influences the work, what is it about that form that's able to encapsulate all of that?
Yeah, I personally, I've always been drawn to metal.
Mm,
I think early on, I was drawn to it primarily because it was not accessible. Like I
uh,
didn't, I had access to a wood shop and I knew how to work with wood, but working with metal seemed like out there. I was like, ooh, I wanna go there. And my first introduction to it was through welding.
mm,
A lot of sheet metal type
mm,
stuff, welding and rod welding. And even then, there was a shiny thing further down, which was machining. So like in the welding shop, this is like part of the reason I almost failed out of architecture is because I thought, ooh, welding's my thing, metal's my thing. I finally have access to it. Like screw architecture, I'm gonna go work in the metal shop all the time. But even as I was learning, yeah, and like practicing welding and building sculptures, there's this like room off to the side, which was the machine shop, which is
yeah,
kind of like you needed special training, like and you had
yeah,
to like
yeah,
get there. And while I was in undergrad, I never got to machine. I never
uh,
got there. And so to me, yeah, there was still this thing that was like, ooh, if only I could machine metal, there's
yeah,
so many things I would love to make. And so it was this carrot that had been hanging in front of me for so many years. And then finally, when I got to machining, I kind of got to it like on my own a little bit, but not the right way. So I bought myself like a little CNC milling machine that I could afford that was just strong enough to machine metal, but it was a huge pain in the ass. I didn't know how to do any work holding because the internet
yeah,
wasn't like filled with information at that point yet.
right,
And so I was really struggling. And then uh yeah, and then I guess I just like slowly learned on my own how metal machining works. And then in during that period, we were working with outside vendors to get stuff machined because that sort of became a thing on the internet where you could finally contact many manufacturers. So you kind of had manufacturers at your fingertips to be like, ooh, I could work with you, or I could work with you. You kind of do some good machining work, maybe you do. And so that was a really exciting moment where I was like, oh, I think I know enough about machining. I know how to CAD stuff now. I can get stuff machined. And then a few years after that, I finally learned how to like run machines in a real machine shop. And then we were like, oh, this is it. Like, I think I was right. This is the way to make things.
uh,
And I think it aligned with I think just the way we want products to exist. Like I think the question of like why we make things last forever, I think is weird to me. I'm just like, why isn't everything designed to last forever? It's so weird that people make products that don't last forever. It's
yeah,
just to me, it's just a weird way to approach products. And so I think the
yeah.
way we do it is it just seems like the right thing to do. And metal's like a nice way to get there. Yeah, continue.
I guess like two things came to mind. One of them is, you know, I actually worked in metal probably before working in softer materials like
Hmm.
wood. And I remember I don't have a very big, as much of a fabrication background as Sei-Wei by any means. And I remember at one point I was like making a wooden box. It's a really simple wooden box. And I like stupidly was CNCing it and trying to put it together. And I had like I was working as if I was making a metal box, but then making it out of
Uh,
wood. And, when I went to go glue it all together after it had been like sitting out overnight, like the part that I cut warped
right.
and dried in a different way. And I was like, I don't think I've made anything really with wood. In my head, I was like, mental note. When you work with metal, it's a control thing too. Like you have so much more control
Uh,
over what you're making. Whereas, like, when you put something that's softer out into the world, I have huge respect for those things and I love them for myself. But, the idea of, giving somebody something and like kind of not knowing how it's gonna be within their world, like gives me a little bit of anxiety. And like I don't trust that I know enough about those materials in order to actually like offer them to other people. So that's one little anecdote.
I'm wondering what your relationship is to the critical design movement, discursive design, speculative design, that whole strand of design. Taylor, I heard in an interview you said something like you're wondering if like you actually wanted an art practice and you're doing design because that's how you know how to make money. Um, and it seems to me that so many of your products are idea based, are they do come from this impulse to create, which speaks to what's happening in critical design. But I don't hear you talk about that or identify yourself in that way. What's your relationship to that strand of design?
When you listed all those different categories, I was like, I should learn more about all the different design disciplines that are out there because I actually don't identify with any of them or know that much about design. Which is, it's kind of funny because, I consider myself a designer, like an okay one. I maybe consider myself, I don't know what I consider myself, but even if I was to go and like teach at a school, teach design, it would feel weird because I really can't have conversations that use those categories.
I think you're selling
And
yourself
it's
short.
just, well, like, I don't know. Those things are interesting, but I've never taken an interest in them.
Mm.
Um, and I don't know why. Like, you know a lot more about that stuff, and you have books from your past upstairs that you've accumulated on many of those subjects.
Yeah.
And like we're friends with a lot of people who work in those areas too. Um, like I'll go see museum shows when
Yeah.
something interesting with that comes out. What was your question again?
I mean, I'm
Your
curious
Sorry.
your
relationship to
your
that.
relationship
What's it?
to critical design, like all of these sort of speculative design, critical design practices. And the reason I ask, and I actually think you're speaking to what I was reading into your work, and I'm sorry to cut you off and say what I do want to hear your answer, but your the way so many of your products are questioning time, how we keep time, what does it mean to keep time? Those feel like what people in the critical design spaces would call critical design or discursive design that's meant to generate conversation in some way. But say when you're talking about why don't all products last forever, that felt like a critique of design that you are embodying in your own products already. um, the design theorist Cameron Tonkinwise has this line that I love where he says, like, anytime you put a word in front of design, you're saying that design doesn't already do that. And so if you
Mm.
say critical design, you're saying that design already isn't critical. And I
Right.
feel like that's what I like about your work is that your work, you don't identify with those movements, but your
Right.
work is actually doing that just inherently in all of these forms. And so I'm sorry, now I'm just answering the question,
Yeah.
my
No, I
reading of
think
your
you
work for
nailed
you.
it.
But
Yeah,
That's
100%.
a
Like I
really
think we're like in our discussions where we never talk about that stuff. We're not like, hey, let's do a speculative design project. That's not how we approach things.
right.
but sometimes it ends up that way. Like I think maybe, yeah, I mean, the only one we've kind of talked about is speculative design, but just in the context that I feel like a lot of, or the majority of speculative design projects are just that. They're like speculative and they're meant to be like a one-off
Right.
device to start a conversation. And I think our approach is more like where we want to be, and why we've discussed it is essentially like, hey, we want to be in that space. Like we want to be right on that border
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we make products that are like, it could be a speculative design project, but you can actually buy this thing and live with it and have a real conversation with it, not just as an idea, but actually experience it and have meet other people that have also experienced it. And but we're not in getting there or trying to produce that. We're more just like, that's a really interesting space to be in terms of where we occupy our, or where we put our design objects. And we make a lot of really also mundane everyday things, but as a studio, the art practice, design practice kind of merges at this point where we're like,
I
oh, we
think
want to
that's right.
make weird things that also exists, that we mass
Yeah.
produce that people can buy.
Yeah. And not as like we don't try to make weird things. They're very honest. Like, we're like, I really, really want this specific thing. And I could actually complete that sentence right now for
Hmm.
you with the specific thing that we're
Okay.
working on that I want to make. Um, and like the constraints at this point are, they've lessened, but like technology and access to technology, um, at certain, like access to certain technologies are our main constraint,
Yeah.
even for us, like not, I don't know, I'm quoting, who are relatively experienced with technology, I want to have access to more stuff so that we can make those things more of a part of our practice. There's always that tension.
That makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I'm thinking of the TimeSense launch clock, and I'm thinking of pen type B, which I think you describe as an over-engineered pen on your website. And to me, those are bordering these questions that you're asking. It's like, why does somebody need a pen like this? But then it makes you think about, what is the role of a pen? Why should a pen last? Why doesn't everything last this long? I think that's doing what so much of critical design, speculative design is trying to do, but you're doing it in a way that is real, as opposed to something that lives in a gallery or is, shown on a website or something, which I think is really, really interesting. Um, I think I have two more questions. I want to go back to something you were saying earlier about, Taylor, about how much you still love software and you think software is this powerful tool. And I'm struck by how so much of our lives are mediated by things that are both physical and digital, that are both hardware and software, that increasingly everything physical has software in it, and our interactions with software are physical. And I'm sort of just wondering what your thoughts on that are, and how that influences the type of work you're doing in the studio, and the way you see software and hardware actually coming together in your work or in future projects.
Years ago, I think when I had limited access to the ability to make things, and I was exploring different, art installations or sculptures, or um, I would try to model everything that I would make beforehand in software,
Mm,
just as a way to like really understand, like, what are these inputs? What are you
yeah.
getting from it? How does that structurally get laid out in maybe visually, but also just like the mechanisms of it? How does that get laid out? Um, and then like, how does that feel? So I think that there's a lot of questions often that you can answer in software before, just like little sketches before
Yeah.
you make the thing. Like I cannot, it's not going to work for pen, obviously. Um, so I just think that like for a long time, I don't know why I've thought about this, but like I think about people as like these inputs and outputs. And I do about everything that we make as like what are the sensorial inputs that are going into everybody's body when you experience a thing.
Mhm.
And, even if that's not like code, the world to me like feels learning about the structure of code in software made me understand the structure of the world, the physical world in
Ah,
a way too that, just was like, actually, there's these like very discrete things going on. And I do think of a lot of our experiences. I do think of our experiences like that. Um, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Even though they're not software, the structures that we've recreated in software in our computers exist in the physical world.
I feel like it would be very easy for you both to continue just doing what you're doing now, to keep making these types of products, to keep doing this experimentation. And I'm wondering how do you continually challenge yourself? How do you make sure that you're not just doing the same thing again? What does maybe a better way to say it is like, what does growth mean for you? I don't mean growth in scale, but growth in your skills and development and thinking. But how do you sort of keep moving forward in this small scale independent practice that you've created for yourself?
What a great question.
Mm, yeah.
No, I think this is a challenge actually that we talk about, that we confront all the time. And it's different for both of us because, we're both individuals and we both have needs in order to feel inspired and in order to feel
Mm-hmm.
fulfilled on a day-to-day basis. And then that's always being reconciled with the realities of running our business,
Right.
which sometimes is like really uninspiring.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but I'm so grateful for what we have, but at the same time, you know, we spend a lot of the time doing things that we don't want to do, and
Yeah.
often that takes up so much time that there's like
Yeah.
not really that much room left to be inspired. Sei-Wei, I think, but I'm not going to speak for you, has like an easier time carving out and like taking that time to have fun and to play and to get himself inspired. I struggle with that a lot more, but I've been like doing things recently to get better at that.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, it's a struggle. Um,
Yeah, I find it not to be a struggle.
yeah, I guess that's why I was like
Yeah.
jumping on that answer and say what it was.
But there are, I mean, I agree. There are definitely things sometimes that I'd rather be doing, but it's part of life. It's like not everything is super fun all the time. But I think as a studio, I think for me, growth is essentially being able to work on more interesting projects. That's it. It's like very straightforward in my head. It's like, yeah, and weirder stuff. Like, we have like a giant backlog of projects. Some of them are art-ish stuff. Some of it is very designy product stuff. But ultimately, I feel like that's like an endless bucket of stuff, and we're just
Yeah.
trying to do more of that.
Can I word that in like maybe my own
Yeah,
way?
good. Yeah.
Um, I want us to be able to like answer our curiosities,
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
time to answer our curiosities. Um, and it often seems like, it's hard to like answer some of the, or like to probe and try to like frame a way to get at an answer to something that's like actually interesting to us. And that takes time and a lot of like deep thinking and like focused work. So I want more of that.
And I guess the challenge is how do you answer that curiosity without, I mean, the sort of manifesto and principles on your website, my favorite one there is never exit, which is like how do you answer your curiosity while also maintaining that independence and control over your time and resources and studio that you have now. Because it would be easy, maybe it wouldn't be easy, but you could do I imagine a CW&T X big brand, you know, and they hire you and you get a lot of money, and then you have time to do that. But that also doesn't seem right for what you want either. And so that's the tension, I guess, right? Or the tension that I'm hearing in your answer is maintaining the scale, the studio, the freedom, the control, while also leveling up on the curiosity and experimentation. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And like, I think the way that bigger studios do that is like they hire people to do X brand.
Right.
Well, you know, I think that's how people do it.
Right. How big studios do more creative stuff. I feel like big studios end up not doing really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and then somehow they still end up not doing the interesting stuff.
Right.
But that's
Yeah, I think that's the danger. And I think I would not I don't want to go there. Like I think part of the balance that we have to maintain is making sure the ultimate driving force is not money. Because once it becomes money, it's like game over. We're gonna become a big studio that does boring stuff. And I think in my head, it's like whatever it takes, both from like a cultural standpoint and talking about it and making sure everybody understands. It's like, hey, we're not going to be a giant studio. We're not going to be raking in tons of money. And that's okay, because the flip side, we want to be on this side of that equation.
Yeah, but I think that also means that you spend half your day answering emails.
I know, but that's the you know, it can't all be super fun.
This is real. By
yeah, this is the conversation we have all the time. And we're trying to find that balance. It's like, what can we, you know, like pay money for so that we don't have to do it without becoming a giant company where then we're like just managing people and we're not making the stuff we want to make anymore.
Yeah, I really did not want to end this conversation with, and we still spend half our time answering emails. So I like the way you spun that positive there at the end. Che-Wei and Taylor, thank you so much for doing this. This was a really great conversation. Thanks for being on the show.
It was a pleasure. Really nice, great questions. It was great.
That was very fun.
That was my conversation with CW&T's Taylor Levy and Che-Wei Wang. It was recorded on September 13th, 2024. Our theme music is by Jeremiah Chu. The show is and always will be free, thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. If you like what we're doing, I hope you consider supporting us and get some bonus content each month. You can follow us across social media at Surface Podcast. You can listen to all of our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at our website, scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.